When you are looking at tracks, there's some critter who has passed by there some time ago, and they have left you a smattering of clues. And sometimes they're really, really, really good clues, and sometimes they're really, really subtle. And as naturalists, it's so much fun to kind of get in there and start rooting around and try to figure out the mystery. So if I'm wondering what animal came here, I can't directly observe that animal, which, by the way, is also a really useful thing to do. If you see a bobcat walk across a field, and then the bobcat leaves, go and try to find any tracks, because you know, like, the bobcat was just here. Can I find bobcat tracks? What do bobcat tracks look like? You'll find the track and you go like, ah, this is the track that the bobcat made. And if you can see where the bobcat stepped and look there and find a track, you know that this is a bobcat track, right? So you know something about the track of the critter from your own direct observation. But most often, that's not what happens. What happens is, way before you came, the bobcat went sneaking by that morning. And now you come by and there's a little bit of tracks and there's sign there. And what we want to do is to collect the clues. And you're going to sort of start with a large list of potential critters. And what we do by looking at the clues is we start to kind of weed out, like, nope, 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 nope. It's not those. It's not those. There's claws showing, so it's not that. And there's 4 toes, so it's not that. And you finally get down to sort of a situation where you think, like, I think it's very, very likely that this is such and such a critter. I tend to encourage people to really keep track of, really keep sight of your degree of confidence on something. And when you are saying this track is from A, to use the language of uncertainty. So what you want to do, if you're not 100% sure that this is a bobcat track, you say that I think it's very likely that this is a bobcat track, or probable bobcat track, or I am 90% certain that this is a bobcat track. But you see, there's some error bars around it. So you're leaving the possibility that you might be wrong. And this is important for several reasons. The first is, you don't want to kind of get in the habit of, when you're not 100% sure about something, to say this is a bobcat track, because that habit can sort of train you to make assertions that you cannot, that you're stating an assertion, making a claim with greater confidence than your evidence. So you're going to accept your identification in proportion to your evidence. So I like to think of all my little track ideas as kind of on a slider, from not very confident to very confident about it. And if we practice tracking that way, then we're kind of bringing a real honesty to it. There are some trackers who claim that they can identify all the tracks that they find. And I think that there's a bit of nature fakery going on there. And I think that people want to be the sort of the sage of the woods, and they've got all the answers. For all of us, being able to be completely certain about something, it's a comfortable feeling. But I think that if we're really kind of being honest with ourselves as naturalists, we're going to find a lot of tracks out there and we don't know what they are. And so we want to just sort of approach those with our error bars, right? You say how confident you are in it. You get in the practice of doing that, I think you're going to be a much better naturalist, because you're going to be keeping your claims in the realm of the evidence that supports them. And that's really important to do. Before I get into kind of how I record tracks and sign in my nature journal, I just wanted to share with you folks this really wonderful poem. And it's a poem by Mary Oliver, and it's called Bear. And it's about tracking. And so she's out in the woods and she finds this track. Let's see here.
So she writes, "It's not my track," I say, seeing the ball of the foot and the wide heel and the naily, untrimmed toes. And again, I say for emphasis to no one but myself, since no one is with me, this is not my track. And this is an extremely large foot. I wonder how large a body must be to make such a track. I'm beginning to make bad jokes. I have read probably 100 narratives where someone saw just what I am seeing. Various things happened next. A fairly long list. I won't go into it. But none of them told what happened next. I mean, what happens before whatever happens? How the distances light up. How the clouds are the most lovely shapes that you have ever seen. How the wildflowers at your feet begin distilling a fragrance different and sweeter than ever any you have stood on before. How every leaf on the whole mountain is a flutter. That's Bear by Mary Oliver. I really love that. So she's found this big bear track. And when you are in grizzly country and you find something like that, it really gets your attention and heightens your senses. I think she's really picked up on that absolutely beautifully. I also notice that she's saying her observations out loud. So she's also verbalizing her her findings and thinking very much as we nature journalers do. I really wish I could have had the opportunity to have spent some time in the field with Mary Oliver. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was Bear by Mary Oliver. When I first think about drawing, finding tracks, there are Mark Elbrock has a really great way of thinking about how to observe tracks, and there are three ways to observe tracks. And the first is you kind of get down on your belly and you look at the tracks on the ground from this distance. So you kind of get down there and you observe the tracks on your tummy. All right, so if you, from this distance, you can see all sorts of kind of neat and relevant things. You can see the, whether you've got your little sketchbook here, right? You can see the texture, you're looking for toenails, you're looking for all those sorts of details. So the second way to observe tracks is to stand up, right? And here you've got your little sketchbook. And so you stand up and you look around from this standing position, and there what you're seeing is sort of the pattern of these across the ground, right? So what is the sort of the larger pattern of those tracks? What is the spacing of them? I learned a really cool trick from James Halfpenny, who is a tracker near Yellowstone. And what he will often do is to sort of help him kind of observe things from this distance. I will sometimes carry with me this little kit that he made. It's a little set of metal, those little metal wire surveying flags. It's a little flag with on a little metal wire. So he just bundles up maybe 20 of those and sticks them into all the tracks. All right. So, and then what happens is when you're standing up here, you can see the spacing of those tracks. Are they speeding up? Are they slowing down? Are they making a pattern? Is there a break in that pattern? Sometimes when you're looking at those flags from a distance, You'll see some things as you're scanning down on the ground here with your eyes, but as you're looking out at those more distant flags, you can pick up patterns in their spacing and their positioning that you otherwise would not be able to see. All right? And then there's one final way of looking at tracks. And that is, let's back up here on the page. Whoops, wrong way. Whoop. There we go. And that is to float up into the sky. So here you are, floating up into the sky. What you do is you fly above the ground and you look down at the big picture context of what's going on. So you imagine yourself sort of lifting up above the landscape, and from there you're looking at how do these tracks really fit into this larger landscape of what is going on here. Are they in the middle of the meadow? Do they come from the forest edge and kind of creep along the forest edge, then go quickly across the meadow with more widely spaced tracks, perhaps speeding up towards the center of the meadow, and then pausing again when they get to the edge? So what is the large context of what they are? So from here you get the context, and down here you get the details. And in between is just a little bit of both. So those three views, we've talked before about the idea of zoom in, zoom out. Zoom in, zoom out is a really important strategy also for looking at tracks. Because all the elements are here. Right down here on the ground is a single track in front of you. And a single track it's a single word. So down here at this point, I'm going to get the word. So the word may be porcupine, right? So I look down at the track and I go like, right? So this is porcupine track. When I stand up and I look at the patterns that I'm seeing in front of me, instead of a single word, I now can construct a sentence. So down here, the details, I get the word. At here, the sentence. The sentence may be porcupine slowly waddling, right? Or coyote running, because I'm seeing the pattern of these tracks. And up here in context, this is the full paragraph. This may be porcupine moving slowly among lodgepole pine trees on south-facing heavily forested slope in deep snow. Right? So the context is going to, you can take elements that you saw at your standing height, at your laying down height, and put that all together to paint the full story. And that's going to make your nature journaling notes of tracks even more fun. So when you find that single track, remember you've got these three ways of observing it. And each one of those is going to show you something different about what you're seeing. So let's take a look at a single track and how we can think about that and show that in our journal. We're then going to take a look at patterns and gaits and how we might show that in our journal. And finally, we'll take a look at how we would represent and show the full story, the paragraph in our journal. Obviously with words, but we also are going to intentionally use pictures and numbers. Let's do that now. All right. So I find a track. One of the first things that I do when I see an animal track is I look at its overall basic shape. Is the track a long shape like that? Is it more round? different species will kind of give you a sort of a different overall impression of that that track shape. You know, like you've all seen a cow footprint, that's really round. A deer footprint is more long, right? A bobcat footprint is really round. A coyote footprint is more of the box. So I first start with just what is the general shape of that track. And then I'm going to put in a few features. I'm going to start with sort of a general quadruped track, say a dog or a cat. I'm going to actually kind of go over here. I'll do this dog track down here. So here, there's going to be one pad down here at the bottom. And then there are going to be toe marks up ahead. And what I used to do is I would draw this part, this pad, and then I would draw in my toes. And I was careful to sort of note which toes were sticking out. Were the toes all in a line? Were they in a curve? These sorts of things. But when I started hanging out with people who were better trackers than I was, I discovered that something that they were paying a lot of attention to is the negative space in a track. Let me say that again. The negative space in a track. So when you are, there's going to be marks made by the pads themselves, but there are also going to be spaces that are in here. So for instance, in a coyote track here, there's sort of a large empty space right up here. And what the trackers do is that they look for, and then where are not, so before I draw in those toes, I'm going to leave space for that little gap. And I also look at where are the gaps between the toes. So very often a coyote track, people sort of imagine an X through it of space. And the back toes are going to fit in these spaces here. And the front toes are going to fit in these spaces here. So getting in the spaces here, you know, here I've got this big X, and I've got room to swing a cat right in here in the middle of this track. So rather than just looking at the toes themselves, what I've learned to do is that I've learned that the spaces between these are really, really important. So coyotes have this X. If I'm looking at a bobcat track, the space here between the toes is much smaller, right? And so here is the pad of the foot here. There is a space in these, but the cat, they think of like a letter C wrapping around the top of this. And then the toes are going to fit on the outside of that letter C. So you see how the negative spaces in these two tracks are really, really different? Here, I've got the letter C wrapped around the top of the cat track. And here in the coyote, I've got this more open space here with an X through it. So negative shapes are our friends. Now, I'm going to take a closer look at the the shapes of these pads themselves. So for my friend the coyote here, I don't want to just put down ovals where those toes are. Very often you will find that the individual toes themselves have a little bit of shape to it. So you want to look for, as you're looking at it, say to yourself, where is it curved? Where is it rounded? Or is it rounded all the way around? On this pad down here, the metacarpal pad, this pad on the dog family, so by the way, these, when you're looking at these pads, these little bumps right here in my hand, all right, that is what this pad is. These little bumps up here, the tips of my fingers, that's what those are. So where's my pen? There's my pen. So in the dog family, there's one bump right up here. And then that pad swells out to 3 bumps down below. Maybe have this center one be a bigger bump. So bigger space there. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is look for claw marks. I want to intentionally look for claw marks. Some animals, the claws will show, and some they won't. So if there are claw marks showing in the soil here, I'm noticing how far those are from the track itself. Now I can leave this just as an outline. You also can have fun filling in the track just to make it a little bit more kind of visually apparent to you. And in doing this, you want to think about kind of giving just a little bit of, if I could do it, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of filling this in. So one would be, I'm just going to take a pen and fill that in with some color. And this makes kind of very clean shapes. Here, I've got myself a little, just a little Copic marker. I could use watercolor to do the same thing. Another thing I could do is use hatch marks, right? So I could just put this in as an area of tone. I'm going to draw a set of parallel lines across it. Another thing that I can do is I can make the lines that go across it, if I give them a slight curve, then it's actually, first let me show another sort of thing I could do. I also, here's another way of kind of making cross hatching marks. I'm going to make these just in some different directions, right? So cross hatching marks there, or I should say hatching marks, because that's hatching, this is cross hatching. If I want to suggest a shadow with this, I imagine that light is coming from the top left-hand corner. And so that means that this edge of the depression will be in shadow. This edge would be more in light. So I'm just going to take a set of lines in this other direction and kind of put them in there to sort of show that, like, look, this toe pad is, it's sort of sinking down there. There's my shadow. I suggest using the convention of top left lighting. The final thing I can do is I can show a little bit of contour if I curve these lines. If I curve those lines, then you get a little bit of sense that, oh, there could be a curved thing in here. And so in this area here, if there are different sections to this, I can put these lines in here. Just sort of suggest that there are these different and I could put in some of those curved lines also with cross-hatching. To suggest that that side of the track is a little bit more in shadow. If there are places between these tracks that are where the ground is sort of pushed up or wrinkled up because of the animal walking over it, I can kind of show any kind of cracks or sort of piles of other debris or sort of stuff in here. So sometimes when the track comes, you will get kind of like bunching up of material in here. So I can also sort of show how that track coming down disturbed the soil in that place. And then one final thought on these tracks is that sometimes if this is a side view of the ground, you may have a track that is like this, right? And that's what this kind of suggests, that there's here, there are kind of these nice clean walls that come up. But sometimes when the animals are walking around, here's ground surface number 2, what you'll see is that there's a part of it that is dug in. And then the other part, instead of kind of coming up to a nice clear edge wall, it's going to kind of come up to the ground surface at more of an angle, which means there's a cliff edge to that track here. And on this side, it's blending in. So I'm looking at where this track is deepest. Having a clear line around the entire track is suggesting that you kind of have a nice little edge all the way around. I can suggest that it is deeper here and then lighter out here this way. So let's say I had one of these toes. And what I can do is I'm going to make a series of lines that are deeper where it's deepest and further apart where it is getting more shallow. And when it gets up to the same height as the ground here, I stop making those lines. And you notice that I haven't continued that line around here because I'm not seeing a clear, like, where do I make that edge? Do I make it down here? What do I do? I can't see that, so I don't draw it. And so what I'm doing is I'm showing that my track is the most clear here. Here's this little deer track. And the tips of it are really punched in. But then as you get further back on the track, that's not the case. So I can actually communicate a lot of information. How distinct is that edge? A hard line all the way around is going to suggest that it's a really distinct track edge all the way around. But something like this says, I know what I'm seeing here, but over here, I'm not really sure. The pads here in the bobcat track, this is actually a double bump in the bobcat track. So let's say that this track had, it's easier to see up here, but as I go further back on those tracks, it's a little bit more difficult to see. Those should probably be a little bit further spaced apart. And then, let's see, I have a nice deep track here. I can even put in hatching just to sort of say like this zone right down here. That's where we're really kind of getting, that's where it's the deepest. And in this part here, nice and deep. But as I get back here, I see less of that. All ways of communicating some fun information about it. And of course, I can combine media together. I'll take this little Copic marker again. In these parts here, punch that in. The marker is also kind of liquefying a little bit of the ballpoint pen. So I can clean my brush off. Clean my brush off. And when you finish a drawing of a track, it's easy to then look at it and, you know, it feels good. You want that to be right. But then you look back at it and you say to yourself, like, you know what? These two are too close together. There should be more space between those. What you want to feel free to do is to edit your drawing. Whoops, there we go. So here, so I've just drawn in a little correction. Am I right? Should be more space between toes. Once you kind of give yourself permission to edit yourself, you're going to find that the accuracy in your journal pages goes way up. And a lot of the pressure of having to make your drawings perfect gets removed from you because you now have the flexibility to make mistakes, and you can still kind of get in there and edit and comment on that. And you don't have to go like, oh no, that drawing was wrong. And you think like, but other people will look at this and they'll know I made a mistake. What's going to happen is other people will look at this and kind of go like, oh man, you know, you're so observationally honest in your journal. I love that. That's really cool. So it's just giving yourself permission to, you want to do I'm going to do the best job that I can, but if there are things that are inaccurate, I can edit that, I can change that, even when it's written in pen. And that's okay. So now what I want to do is think about measuring this. So I bring with me a little ruler, and we use the centimeters, so not inches. So let the inches go. But you're going to measure the track from the outside edge of the toe to the outside edge of the toe. If you were to draw sort of from those two lines, right? So this is 57 millimeters wide. And from the front of the track to the back of the track, that's 51, right? It is 51 millimeters long. Another thing that I can do is get a measure of the claw length. So the wide is from the outside of the toe to the outside of the toe, top of the toe to the bottom of the toe for width and length. When we're doing that, we don't include the claws. So the height of this foot here would be from up there to down here. And then what I want to do is separately put in the claw length. The claw length is 10 millimeters from the tip of the claw. The claw length is going to change in winter when you're running around on snow. You get longer claws. Then when you are running around on granite, you get shorter claws. That trims your nails for you. And bobcats, cat family, except unless you're a cheetah, you're not going to see any claw marks at all because they retract their claws when they're walking around. So those are a few strategies for putting in the marks of the tracks themselves. And that's what you see when you are down on your belly. This little guy here. Now we stand up. And when we're standing, we're looking at the patterns that are made by not in a single track, but in a set of tracks. And so it's useful to first think of, like, here is the general kind of line of the direction of travel of my animal's tracks. And you can have these, depending on the layout on your page, you can do these horizontally or a vertical line. And you will find that some animals, as they're walking, their little footprints are right on that line. So it's almost as if they were just sort of walking on a rail. In other cases, here's my line of travel. You're going to find that there's a little bit of what's called straddle. So you'll find the left side and the right side. Right. When we have footprints and there's a little bit of straddle, we can make measurements off these. Now, in these, by the way, you are also going to find, front feet and back feet. Actually, first let's sort of define this straddle and stride, because these are a couple useful things to measure. So if I've got a set of front and back footprints here, and I got another one here, and then another one right up here, what I want to measure is from the back of one foot here to where that foot comes down again over here, I am going to measure that distance. So I want to, in centimeters, get the distance from the back of one foot to where the back of that foot is again. If it's hard to see the backs of those fronts, I could do it from the front of the foot to the front of the foot. but the same part of the foot to the same part of the foot, and the same foot to the same foot, where that foot comes up and down again. That length is my stride. Something that's very useful to do that is a little tape measure, right? If you have a retractable tape measure that does centimeters, that's going to be a lot easier for you to collect that information. The other thing that you want to think about is what's called the straddle of these tracks. So this is the stride. The straddle is how wide is the stance of this thing? How far apart are they? So I'm going to draw a line along this side of this track and this side of this track. So from the outside of one to the outside of the other, that's the straddle. And again, we want to record that in centimeters. So as animals are speeding up, these are going to change. So in a certain part of, if you are looking at some tracks and you find that in one area the stride is whatever the stride is, and it gets increasingly far apart as you go out into the meadow, that means your animal is speeding up. So you can, it's really cool to be able to measure that. And if you have those flags in the ground, then it's really easy to see, wow, those are getting further apart as they're going out there. That's speeding up. Oh, that's slowing down over there. Right before it came to the edge of the little ledge, right? Oh, it slowed down right here, right? And then, jumped off there. So it came here kind of fast and then it slowed down at the edge. You can, that tells you part of the story. So that's stride and straddle. Another thing that you can do is to look at the pattern that is made by the feet. So let's turn the page. And I'm going to back up. Here we are. So different kinds of animals are going to make different sorts of patterns with their feet. And if this is so here's my direction of travel. Here's one kind of pattern that you'll get. You'll sometimes find on an animal that is walking slowly, it will look like, I've got one foot over here, and then the next one over here, and then the next one over here, and the next one over here, and the next one over here, and the next one over here. And so it looked like my animal was going, left, right, left, right, left, right, like it got up on its back feet and just started walking along. If you get in there really close at belly level, what you'll see is that each one of these is two sets of tracks. There's actually a front foot and a hind foot coming down either almost right on top of each other, or in some cases, right on top of each other. So sometimes it is, I've got my little pattern there. And the footfalls are going right on top of each other. This is called direct register. If I have those feet kind of coming close to each other, but missing, that's indirect register. So sometimes they're stepping on their own, and often this is kind of, if you're sneaking along, going really quietly, you're putting your back foot right in the place that front foot was, and it's going to make less noise. It's pretty kind of a cool trick. So this is one pattern that you can see, and then you'll find these groups. Are they getting more spread out? Are they getting more direct register, less direct register? When you're diagramming the tracks, You can draw in the little tracks, but you're going to find that that starts taking, you get so lost in drawing lots of little footprints that it's harder to take in the big pattern. So a strategy to do that is just use a triangle in the direction of travel. And if you notice that one of the feet are bigger than the other, for instance, many animals, their front feet are larger than their back feet. For instance, in a moose or a bear, right? Bighorn sheep, anybody with a big front part, it's got their front foot is going to be a bigger shape. So you can just use a big triangle and a small triangle, right? And that shows your direction of travel. In other animals, like a rabbit, the back feet are actually bigger. Let's jump over and look at a bunny pattern, because these are really cool. Here's my direction of travel again. And what will happen is the bunny jumps and they land with their front feet, right? Here are my front feet. If it's a squirrel that climbs in trees, those front feet will land parallel to each other. If it is a squirrel that is a ground squirrel or a rabbit, those front feet are actually going to be staggered like that. And then what happens is the back feet swing around, and the back feet are going to land outside of those front feet and in front of them. So I'm going to put that in here. Big front feet. Sorry, big back feet have swung around here. So this bunny is going in this direction. Right? Those back feet land parallel with each other. Right? These ones here land parallel with each other too. So on the ground squirrels and rabbits, the front feet are staggered, the back feet are parallel. Then those back feet, you push off of those, the bunny goes flying through the air and lands with those front feet again up here. All right. Back feet parallel. So here's my big back feet. So here I'm using little triangle symbols to be these feet. You could also just draw in blobs that are the right sort of the shape of the mark of in the snow.
Jack, would you label which ones they were? You were talking about two
Oh,
different
sure.
animals and
So
switching back and forth.
This is a bunny. Oh no, sorry, this is not a bunny. This is a tree squirrel. And this would be a ground squirrel. Or a bunny, a rabbit. With these feet staggered. You'll get all sorts of other interesting patterns as animals are running. Another kind of common one. Hold on a second, I need to clear my throat. All right. As things are going, bounding along, you can get sort of C-shaped patterns. And so you can get, so I can get patterns like this, where I'm going to have my here are a couple of front feet, and the back feet are doing something like that. So there'll be sort of kind of a group of tracks. And then here's my next little group of tracks. So they'll be in these units. This, for instance, this could be a little dog running along. Well, there's front foot. I've got a couple of back feet here. Then there's a space, and that pattern repeats. So that's unlike this first one, which was just up, 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 up. So there's a clustered pattern, then a space, then that clustered pattern again. So a quadruped running, you'll see that because all the feet will come down together. And then when they jump in between, that will be that space. So in this, you also want to do is to kind of get what is the length of the group and what is the length of the jump, the intergroup. So all of those are things that we can measure and look at. So I want to, if I want to look for the pattern, what is the pattern? I'm going to document that pattern down on my piece of paper. And then I've got, that can give me information about whether it is running, walking. If I get these over a longer period, I can see if the critter is speeding up or not. And those are things I would be observing from the stand. The final little piece of all of this is what you see when you float up above it. And this is where you want to draw a map. So over here, I have the edge of the lake. And how do you know that that's a lake? Because you can write lake. All right, there's their little lake or the pond. You also, if you wanted to, you can, with your maps, you can put symbols in them and you can make a key that says that's water or a pond. There is a marsh area here. And I know that that's a marsh because I draw a little key that says that's a marsh. And you can have a lot of fun making maps. Here's the forest. Lovely, dark and deep. And I'm going to put a little blob over here, and that is my oak forest. And then I found these tracks kind of coming in here, and then they went back like this. So I can show the route that something did, and I can annotate it. I can say that duck kill was right down here, right? And then I go like, oh, did it kill it? Or maybe it scavenged it. So I'm gonna add a little note. Or maybe scavenged. Right. So I can add little annotations in on this sort of thing, but I can show what these marks did. So I can come in here and I can say that this was slow because the tracks were close together. And then this was widely spaced. Widely spaced out here, maybe trotting away. All right, so if I had my tracks close together here, maybe it was sneaking up on something. All right. You can actually do, if you have a good set of tracks, you can do all sorts of fun forensics. If it is snowy where you are, snowy conditions are absolutely incredible for finding these larger stories. In snow, the individual tracks will end up looking much bigger. You have to really look around to try to find any place where you can kind of see the evidence of the pads. Sometimes you get to a little icy, muddy, slushy place and you get a really good track. But in snow, very often the individual marks will be kind of a little bit blurred. And, but you're going to be able to see the story, kind of the information that you see when you're flying and recording this stuff much, much better. So depending on the kind of substrate that you have, you're going to be able to tell different sorts of stories in different sorts of places. If it's really sandy and there's no wind, you might get great sets of tracks. The individual resolution in an individual track might not be as good, but just like in snow, you can see full stories of things running around in the sand. If it's muddy, there'll be some places where the mud holds really great tracks. So you might be able to get your sort of standing and lying position. Well, if you want to lie down in the mud, you'll be able to kind of get good information from those angles, but sometimes you might not get a full track series as far as you might get if we're looking around in the snow. So just sort of don't think that you have to do all of those views in every one. You want to think about all three and see what you can get in each of those. But there will be situations where one will kind of give you more information than others. If you are looking for a good book on mammal tracks and sign, if you're in North America, this is a really nice one. And it's filled with, it's got really good scat stuff. It's got all sorts of trails and lots of information on the tracks of individual critters. If you are if you're one of our friends across the pond, this is one of my favorite books out there. This is LaRosse Guide to Animal Tracks and Signs, and it's very, very clean, very, very readable, graphically pleasing, and well thought out. So that's another thing that you can use as a resource. Have some fun with this and see what you can do. Remember, you've got your words, your pictures, your numbers, all of those come together. You're the detective out there. Something has happened. And when you are tracking, what you're doing is you are peering into the past. And you're letting these stories from the past come up and start to play with you. It's really an amazing thing to do. You're not just limited by what was happening right at that point when you were there. Everything that walked through that meadow has left its little story behind it. And the more we train ourselves to observe, the more of those stories will reveal themselves to us.